Hey, it's Pippin coming at you with some amazing P5.speech content. In this video, we're going to be exploring speech synthesis, the output side of P5.speech. And in particular, we're going to be looking at how you do those experiments. And even more in particular, we're going to want to look at not just the technical aspects of the library and what it can do purely in a practical sense, but also in the creative sense. We're going to be looking for the hooks that exist in this particular piece of software for making interesting artistic work. So with that said, let's get going. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, and this is true probably most of the time, and maybe especially in this context of artistic production, is we're going to want to set up a little base camp that allows us to poke at and test the capacities of this particular library in the context of making creative work. So we don't want to overwhelm ourselves by trying to make some big project. What we want to do is just set up the absolute basics. And so to do that, we're going to use a P5 template project. You're probably pretty familiar with this kind of thing by now. We've got a setup, we've got a draw, we're ready to roll. And in our index.html over here, we've got p5.speech included as a script tag so that we can use the library. I'm using the CDN. You can use the file if you want to. Both are good. And so the first thing we would want to do is the absolute basic thing of getting this to say something. And you may already remember how to do that. But if you do not, you could go to the P5Speech website. And you could remind yourself just down here that it is a two-step process. You make a variable, you put in a P5Speech object, and then you use its speak method to get some speech output. So let's do that. Up the top here, I'm actually going to use a const because I don't plan on changing the speech synthesis object. And if I'm not planning on changing it, I should use const. So I'm going to call it speech synthesizer, I suppose, because that's what it does. It's a long variable name, but it is useful in that it says what it does. And I'm going to do that thing of assigning a new p5.speech object. Step 1. Now we could do step 2 here, which is saying something, but what I actually want to do is put that inside a mouse pressed function. That way I can trigger it when I want to, which seems useful for testing. And this gets us around that classic issue of browsers not playing sound until there's been a user event. This is a user event, right? So in here, we can tell the speech synthesizer to talk about something. That would be amazing. To say something of our choosing. And that's a really important decision in general, but for now, let's say the most obvious thing. So we're going to get it to say, hello world. And I think that's about it. There are more things that we're going to want to do for testing, but for now, let's just make sure this works at all. So we'll go live. We've got a screen that's blank. Let's click.
Hello world.
Hello world. It worked. So that's great. Now, it occurs to me in looking at that boring blank screen that it would be nice to have a canvas. So let's have a canvas. And let's give it some visibility by giving it a background color. What do I like? I like this. Whatever. Let's see. Not bad. Now, if we're actually testing P5 speech, we can't do a lot of testing right now because we aren't really accessing all of the stuff that it does outside of the base fact of saying some words, which is already cool. But let's go a little deeper and let's go back to the API and remind ourselves of some of the things that it does. In particular, if we just go down this list of methods, we don't need to worry about canceling right now, I don't think. List voices does actually seem pretty useful, so I think we should include this in our program just so that when we are wanting to think about voices, we have a list of them available. So we're going to do a console.log of speech synthesizer dot list voices, like that. So list voices spits out a list of the voices. Console.log will print that out for us on the console. Just make sure that that works quickly. Need the console to be open. There they all are. So that's useful. Look, oh, there's somebody called Damayanti. I'm curious about that already, but let's save the excitement for just a second longer and look at the other things. So what else is going to be kind of worth playing with here? Set language interpreter is kind of interesting. I think I'm not going to bother with that right now, but that could be something to think about, the concept of what language it thinks it's speaking. Set pitch, very clearly going to be something we want to play with. So let's make sure that in our code we are able to do that. So let's add set pitch here. So speech synthesizer.set pitch. Now the standard is 1, so I'm going to include 1 there, and that's going to be a number that we're going to want to change. Set rate, similarly, is a thing that actually changes what the speech sounds like. Speeds it up, slows it down. So let's also include a set rate. Speech synthesizer.set rate 1. These are all the default values still. I just want to get this little thing set up. Set voice seems very important. Note here that list voices is important because it tells us what we can write in here. So maybe this is an opportunity to do one small piece of playing around, which is to set the voice to that voice that we just found out, which was Damayanti. That's pretty exciting. So let's put Damayanti into here, just so that there's something being set. I don't know what the default is in that particular case. Set volume. That doesn't strike me as massively interesting. Like, we kind of intuitively know that it's just going to be quieter or louder, so I'm going to leave that one out. And that means that we've kind of hit the end of the key things that we can do in terms of the settings. So just to tidy things up, I'm going to actually move this one to the bottom. And here we have our little test bed now. So synthesis settings, and then down here, actually say something. So we've got a little test bed. And that means that when we click here,
hello world.
Oh, and that's what Damayanti sounds like.
Hello world.
She sounds cool. She sounds like probably she is designed to speak a language other than English, if I'm guessing.
Hello world.
I don't think I would be able to guess super well based on the name where that is maybe meant to be. I would have a very slight guess at Turkish, but I don't know. And that's one of the things already that I think is really interesting, right? Like, these voices have got accents because they are used normally for speaking another language. And just like people, when they speak a language that's not their first language, they have an accent, and that adds a certain quality to the kinds of things that they're saying. But we are now set up for exploration, so let's carry on. And this is really in keeping with what I was just saying. One of the things that we need to keep top of mind when we're using this particular piece of technology is not just to think about it as a technical, like, oh, the computer can say something and it's completely neutral, right? That it's just a computer voice that doesn't have any characteristics or implications. Rather, it's important to think about the bigger picture of what voices are, what speech is, what saying something is. And the truth of that is that it's a very, very powerful thing, right? People have voices. People say things. And people say things in particular ways, and they say particular things. And that, I think, is a huge component of what can be interesting about playing around with speech synthesis, is thinking about the computer more in terms of how it can perhaps seem human or inhuman, nice or not nice, anxious or confident. It introduces the world of people in this very specific way. And there are implications about what you say, how you say it, that are tied up in the technical ways that we use the library, right? Like the text that we get it to say, the rate that it gets set at, the voice that we choose, the language that we choose. So let's try some possibilities, right? And I think that these are the key possibilities. And I just want to touch on these. There's a lot of experimenting that I hope that you choose to do on your own. But let's play with the key things that we've identified, which is pitch, rate, voice, and words. And each one of these may or may not trigger off some idea for what we could do. So I'm going to switch, first of all, Damayanti, just to a sort of a very, very standard voice that is intended to speak in English. So it's called Google UK English Mail. It's on that list. I've always got a weird partiality to the the UK English Mail voice, although I don't like the Google one as much as I like the one that comes as a kind of default with other libraries. So,
hello world.
Hello world. So a very different tone already from Damayanti, right? This is a different kind of a person. We're going to inevitably think different things about what this person might say. So they could say something kind of appropriate, since we're changing voices anyway, right? I was going to use pitch, but maybe let's just think about the words in here. What would a UK English male say? Maybe he would be like, would you like a cup of tea? That's the sort of thing that surely all UK English males say.
Would you like a cup of tea?
And it already sounds like oddly appropriate, right? Because there are things that we expect a voice like that to say. And there are things that we don't expect a voice like that to say. Like what might we not expect a voice like that to say? Well, maybe we don't expect a UK English male to talk about ice hockey. I really hope the Habs win the Stanley Cup this year. Excuse me for not actually knowing a ton about hockey, but it just struck me as appropriate now given our context. So what does that sound like?
I really hope the Habs win the Stanley Cup this year.
I don't know if that sounds funny to you, but just like it seems like less likely that we would hear a very British voice talking about the Habs. So you can like create these kinds of dissonances, right? And you could choose different voices. Like we could find out what Xander sounds like when Xander says something like that. We could replace the voice here. What does Xander sound like?
Iedereen Ali hopen de Habs win de Stanley Cup this year.
Okay, well Xander is clearly meant to speak a different language, I think. Let's try that again.
Iedereen Ali hopen de Habs win de Stanley Cup this year.
The Stanley Cup this year. I don't know where Xander's from, but that was pretty interesting. Not super intelligible. What about Vina?
I really hope the Habs win the Stanley Cup this year.
So Vina sounds probably like they're from the subcontinent, maybe India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I'm not entirely sure.
I really hope the Habs win the Stanley Cup this year.
And again, like Vina saying this kind of thing is kind of curious and interesting potentially. We could also put in a different language, right? We could say something really banal in French. Bonjour, comment ça va?
Bonjour, comment va?
Now, Vina's not good at speaking French because it's not what she's designed to do. The way that her pronunciation is designed is not for French. And also, she doesn't really know that she's speaking French. So maybe we should try Google Français there and see if Google Français can pronounce this a little bit better. Google Français, comme ça.
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Oh, well, Google Français is very good at speaking French. Of a particular kind, right? Like that's more of a French from France kind of French. But there are implications there too, like the language that you write your words in is going to be interpreted and expressed in different ways by the voice. And there's like so many experiments that you can do along these lines, right? The interaction between the words and the voice are, I think, potentially very interesting and important. You could also run other experiments, like words are not the only kinds of things that you could say. You could also try and just like say some nonsense, like how do you pronounce that word? It's an interesting thing where actually my son Felix is often asking me to pronounce nonsense collections of letters, and I'm not very good at it because it's not how words actually work, but a computer will have a go. So let's find out how you pronounce this word.
SDHKFKH mashkefemash fajafaf maxage.
And that was actually kind of cool. You could hear that sometimes it was just reading out some of the letters and sometimes it was pronouncing them. I'm going to give Google UK English Female a chance to say this for us.
SDHKFKH micfev fajafaf max.
So you could hear it sort of said fajafaf max here. This is getting into something else about language, which is some things aren't really pronounceable, like SDHKFKH, because there's no vowels in there, right? So maybe if we were wanting to write a nonsense kind of a thing, we should make sure that there's lots of vowels in there as well, and see what happens like if we write a word like that. So it's still nonsense, but maybe it's nonsense that's a little more structured for the computer to try and say it. Yeah, so it has no problem pronouncing a word like that, right? It's just as easy for it to pronounce that as it is for it to say the word tiger.
Tiger.
Maybe it sounds more convincing saying tiger, but only because it's a real word. So these are things to think about. We could also think about it saying like very large numbers. What does it say here? Is it going to say 23764238786, or is it going to say, oh my god, 2.37 billion, etc.? Let's find out.
2,376,423,786.
There you go. So it said it like a number with the words that are involved in numbers. So that's something that we would learn about the system as well at that moment. It can pronounce those things. What if I put in a date out of interest?
The 2nd of February 2027.
That's interesting too, right? Because like if I wanted it to literally say 2 Feb 2027, I kind of can't, because it is interpreting this as a date and saying it in a particular standardized way. Interesting thing to learn as well. What if I use some punctuation? Full stops after every word.
Listen to my words.
So, kind of an interesting emphasis effect there, right? That's different from listen to my words as a sentence.
Listen to my words.
And punctuation makes me think, well, can it read a question?
Listen to my words.
It can. Rising intonation. Can it use an exclamation mark?
Listen to my words.
Is that different from a period?
Listen to my words.
I don't hear a difference, right? So there is a huge amount of exploration around what you say and what voice you say it with. I think that there's a huge amount of potential exploration there. That could be very, very fun. Now, you could also, if I go back to my favorite guy for a second, UK English male, you can say things that are kind of like weird and scary, like, I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
I'm crawling through your air-conditioned ducts right now.
Air conditioning. My bad.
I'm crawling through your air-conditioning ducts right now.
He sounds quite chipper about it, but the point there is that speech, of course, is emotionally loaded. I want to keep this phrase, so I'm going to cut it, but you could also imagine it could say that it loves us.
I love you.
Oh, sounds quite convincing. I hate you.
I hate you.
Maybe he doesn't really mean either of those things, which is kind of interesting in itself, right? But let's go back to the air conditioning ducts, because I want to explore one last thing as we go along here, and that is these two things here, right? Like, if we've got a particular sentence and we want a little bit of control over what's possible, maybe, for instance, if somebody's crawling through our air conditioning ducts right now, they would speak in a very low voice, because that would be scarier. It's a scary thing to say. Let's try that. We'll set our pitch to 0.4. The range of pitch is 0 to 1, I believe. So the lower the number... Actually, no, pitch must go higher. And we should read about that rather than me just assuming things. Pitch is between, there you go, 0.01 and 2. So high-pitched is high, is towards 2, and low-pitched is down towards 0. So let's try that.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
Oh, well, that's much more appropriate and inappropriate. Let's make it even grosser and slower and see. 0.2.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
I do and do not like that. A very different feeling to if we set this up to like 1.8, I assume.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
So that's pretty enjoyable. The high-pitched one, much less threatening, but maybe we should still feel extremely threatened by it. I think 0.2 was pretty good though. And then we could also make it slower, right? The rate also goes between 0 and 2. So what if the person also says it slowly? 0.5.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
Oh yeah, that's really getting somewhere, right? And that's just a small example of these relationships between what you say, I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now, who is saying it, UK English male, I think delivers a good performance here, and how they say it, the pitch and the rate. And you can perform that experiment in all kinds of different directions, whether they're saying nonsense, they're speaking another language, they're speaking a language they're not meant to be speaking, there's different emotional valences that you could be going for, and all of these things implicate each other. You know, if we go back to Vina, what does she sound when she's trying to sound scary in our air conditioning ducts right now?
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
She just doesn't sound quite as scary. What about Zuzana?
I am traveling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
Okay, well, that was really weird. Let's have one more from Alice.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
Oh, okay. Well, that was surprising as well. One weird thing about all of these name-based ones is I've just got no idea of what language it is that they want to be speaking. And that makes it a lot more tricky. These ones, at least here, you can see what language they're intended towards, but there's not very much variation on them, right? We can find out what an American crawling through our air conditioning ducts right now sounds like. I wonder if that's distinct. I would be more scared maybe of US English, of an American, because they might have a gun.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
Oh, they just sound a bit like they got stoned and accidentally went into my air conditioning ducts right now. So long story short, there are a ton of possibilities here for play. And you can probably tell that I get very distracted and I enjoy this process a lot. The key thing is to explore, right? And not feel like there's a right answer, but to see what's possible and see what that maybe stimulates for you. Like for me, I'm leaning horror, I guess. But there are as many different possibilities as there are voices and things to say. So a last little thing I just want to point out, we don't need to do a lot of stuff here, is the idea of the callbacks that work with this library. So I'm going to go back to creepy UK English mail, just for show. And I'm just going to go back and we're going to look at the documentation here. We're going to go down here. And you can see that there are these other properties going on here. Two of which I think might be interesting for us to just take a quick look at are onStart, which is a function that will be called when speech synthesis actually gets going, and onEnd, which is called when speech synthesis is finished. And we could use that, for example, to only display something while the voice is speaking, say. So what if we imagined that we were going to display a subtitle? So let me try and do this quickly. This is not that important how I'm doing it, it's just important to see the callbacks. So we could say show subtitle starts out as false. In draw, we could say if show subtitle is true, then I want to display some text. I've already forgotten how to use the text command, but allow me to guess. I want to show what they're saying, so I'm going to actually turn this into a variable. Oh, let me paste that in there. So that's what they're going to say. I'll replace the speak thing with to say now for tidiness. This kind of like dynamic tidying is, I think, a sensible idea. So now I can display that text there. Let's make sure that that works actually by setting show subtitle to true quickly. So there it is there. So I want that to appear only when the voice is speaking, right? And I kind of like immediately want it to be a little bit bigger. So let me just make it a little bit bigger as well. And I'm going to add a couple of line breaks in here so that it fits on the screen with \n. Good. And I'll make it a little bit bigger again, just because, why not? 36 maybe? There we go. So how am I going to change show subtitle between true and false? I'm going to use those callbacks. And to use them, what I do is I say speech synthesizer, and then the name of the callback onStart equals, and then I need a function in here. Now there's a couple of different ways that I could do this. I could either write the name of a function. So we could say speech started. And I could do the same thing for onEnd. Speech stopped. Speech ended, I guess, is sensible. And then I could write these two functions and use them to handle that, changing that variable. So speech started would set show subtitle to true, so that it will start showing while the voice talks. And speech ended would set show subtitle to false, so that it will disappear when the voice ends. So let's check that out. So there's nothing. I click.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
It worked, right? Because when the speech thing is working, it has promised, because of these two lines right here, that when it starts, it will call this function for us, and that function tells us to show the subtitle. And it says, when I stop, I will call this function for you, which will set show subtitles to false. And that affects here on whether or not we see those subtitles. That's a very reasonable way to do it. I will just say quickly, you could also use, for example, an anonymous function in here to do the same thing. So we could set show subtitle to true like that, and we could set show subtitle to false like that. That's just another, sorry, there's an extra. That's just another way to do it. Neither of those ways are better. You can choose what you feel more comfortable with. They both have their pros and cons.
I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.
So that's just a quick look at two of the callbacks that you could use, and a sort of an expressive way that you might want to use them. You could trigger all kinds of things based on the idea that speech is happening. And what's next? Well, what's next is the next video, which is going to be about speech recognition, the sibling or weird twin of speech synthesis. And with that, I will say goodbye for this video, signing off with the classic time-honored phrase, I'm crawling through your air conditioning ducts right now.